Imagine dedicating years of your life to someone, loving them with every part of your being, only to be discarded as if they had never meant anything. That's exactly what happened to Camilla. She and Kevin were happily married, until one day he simply decided that she was no longer enough. Under pressure from his own mother, Kevin gave up the love of his life because she couldn't give him an heir. Homeless, aimless, and with her heart in pieces, Camilla left, vowing never to look back. But fate had other plans. Months later, when there was no hope left, she discovered something that would change everything. She was pregnant. 7 years had passed. Now strong and determined, Camilla raised her children alone. But an unexpected reunion threatens to turn her world upside down. Kevin is back, and when he sees the boys for the first time, he is shocked. They are identical to him. Now the question remains, does Kevin deserve a second chance, or is it too late to make amends? Get ready for an emotional story, full of love, regret, and choices that change lives forever. Because some wounds heal, but others never do. The room was silent, but not in a comfortable way. It was a heavy silence, full of expectations and unspoken words. Kevin was sitting in his leather armchair, his elbows resting on his knees and his hands clasped tightly together. He couldn't look at Camilla, not after what his mother had said that morning. Camilla, on the other hand, was standing in the center of the room, her eyes fixed on him, waiting. Her heart was pounding, a heaviness growing in her chest with every second he remained silent. Something was wrong. She had suspected it for months. Kevin was distant, cold, always finding excuses to avoid long conversations. But now, something told her that tonight would be worse than any assumption she had made. Kevin. Her voice sounded hesitant, breaking the suffocating silence. He took a deep breath, finally forcing himself to face her. Camilla saw something there that she had never seen before. Hesitation. Kevin was not a hesitant man. He always knew what he wanted, always acted with certainty, but now he seemed lost. "We need to talk," he said, and his tone was low, almost a whisper. A shiver ran down Camilla's spine. She knew those words never meant anything good. "What's going on?" Her voice came out weaker than she wanted. Kevin stood up, ran a hand through his hair, and walked a few steps across the room. He seemed to be fighting with himself, as if what he was about to say was a sentence for both of them. "Camilla, we tried. For 3 years, we tried." Camilla felt a knot tighten in her throat. "What are you talking about?" Kevin closed his eyes for a moment, gathering his courage. When he opened them again, his expression was firmer, although the pain was still there. "I need an heir, Camilla. My mother. My family. They expect it of me." Those words cut like sharp blades. "You're talking as if I had a choice," her voice faltered. "As if I had control over this." Kevin looked away. "It's not your fault. I know that. But we need to be realistic. It's been 3 years and it hasn't happened." Camilla's heart was pounding uncontrollably. She took a step back, as if to escape the growing pain. "Do you want to get rid of me because I can't have children?" Kevin didn't answer immediately. This silence was all she needed. "My mother thinks it's the best decision," he finally said. The shock made her take another step back. "Your mother?" she repeated, incredulous. "Olivia is behind this?" Kevin frowned. "She's worried about the future of the family. My future." Camilla let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, what about my future, Kevin? Have you even thought about it?" He closed his eyes, exhausted. "I'm not trying to hurt you." "But you are," she whispered. Silence settled between them again. Camilla felt the air was too heavy to breathe. "Do you really want to do this? Send me away as if I never meant anything to you?" Kevin hesitated but said nothing. That was enough. With trembling hands, Camilla turned and left the room, struggling to hold back the tears. The rain was falling heavily as Camilla packed her suitcase. Each folded item of clothing was a piece of her life being torn away. Her fingers trembled as she closed the zipper, as if it would prevent the inevitable. When she went downstairs, Kevin was already waiting for her at the door, his hands in his pockets, his expression grim. He didn't offer to help. He didn't try to stop her. "Don't look back," she whispered to herself, holding on tightly to the handle of her suitcase. She walked to the door. "Goodbye, Kevin." He didn't answer. Camilla took the first step out of the house she had once called home. The rain beat against her skin like a slap, cold and cruel, like the fate that now awaited her. The door closed behind her, sealing a chapter she never wanted to write, but perhaps a new one was just beginning. Camilla's suitcase lay in the corner of the small, stuffy room where she now lived. The space was modest, but it served as a refuge. Even so, the silence was deafening. What had once been a house full of promise was now down to a narrow bed, a small closet, and a window overlooking a narrow alleyway. She looked down at her trembling hands. 3 years of marriage thrown away. 3 years of loving someone who in the end considered her disposable. She took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears. She had no time for regrets. She had to move on somehow. The first step was to find a job. She spent days walking around the city, going into businesses and asking if they needed anyone to work. Most of them turned him down without even looking in his direction. It was only when he found a small cafe that a kind lady decided to give him a chance. "It's never too late to start again, dear," said the owner, smiling. Camilla held on to that job as if it were her lifeline. The days were tiring and the nights lonely. But at least she was busy. At least she had a purpose. Over time, she began to feel part of that small environment. She learned the regulars' orders, got the hang of preparing the perfect coffee, and even started to smile more. Still, deep down, an emptiness remained, until the symptoms started. At first, she thought it was just accumulated tiredness. Then came the morning sickness, extreme exhaustion. Fear came like an avalanche. It couldn't be. It would be too cruel an irony. But when the delay in her cycle became evident, Camilla knew there was no denying it. Sitting in front of the doctor's office, she waited for the result with her heart in her throat. "Congratulations, Camilla," said the doctor with a gentle smile. "You're pregnant." The world seemed to spin. She gripped the arms of the chair, trying to process the news. This must be wrong," she muttered. The doctor kept her expression calm. "The test is conclusive. You're expecting not just one, but 2 babies. 2 babies. Camilla felt her breathing fail. "Twins," the doctor nodded. "Yes. And given the gestation period, I think you were already pregnant before you left home." Camilla put her hand to her belly, where life was already growing without her knowing it. Kevin had gotten rid of her without knowing that his children were on the way. And now it was up to her to carry on. Camilla held on tightly to the hospital sheets, breathing hard. Sweat dripped down her forehead and her whole body shook. The pain was intense, but the anxiety inside her was even greater. "You're doing well, Camilla," encouraged the nurse next to her. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to gather her strength. The fear of being there alone was overwhelming, but there was something stronger inside her, the desire to meet her children. The doctor looked at her with an encouraging smile. "Once again, Camilla. You can do it." She gathered what was left of her energy and gave one last push. Loud crying filled the room. Camilla felt the world stop for an instant. "It's a boy," announced the doctor, while a nurse wrapped the baby in a soft blanket. Camilla's eyes filled with tears as she saw the little life in her arms. He was perfect. Before she could take it all in, she felt another violent contraction. "It's not over yet," said the doctor with a smile. Another wave of pain and effort until a second cry echoed through the room. Another baby boy. Camilla could hardly breathe. She looked at her sons, her heart overflowing with love. Lucas and Samuel, the names she had chosen during long, sleepless nights, imagining what they would be like. Now they were there. Her sons, her new reason for living. She held their small hands, making a silent promise. No matter what happened, she would never leave them alone. And she would never let anyone make them feel unwanted, as they had once made her feel. The sound of children's laughter filled the small living room. Lucas and Samuel ran around the sofa, carrying toy cars as they squealed with delight. Camilla watched from the kitchen, a soft smile on her lips. 7 years had passed, and those boys were everything to her. Life hadn't been easy, but every sacrifice had been worth it. She worked tirelessly in the cafeteria, making sure her children had everything they needed. And in the middle of that journey, someone special had come along. James appeared for the first time as a repeat customer, always ordering the same coffee and leaving generous tips. At first, Camilla didn't pay much attention, but over time she noticed something different about him. His presence was calm, his gaze always attentive. Over the months, James became part of the small family's daily life. He wasn't just a customer at the coffee shop. He was a friend, someone willing to help when Camilla needed it, someone who effortlessly won the children's affection. "Mom, look what James brought us!" shouted Lucas, running into the kitchen with a children's book in his hands. James appeared right behind him, holding a bag with some groceries. "You promised you'd learn to read better, and I thought this book would be perfect," he said, winking at Samuel. Camilla crossed her arms, feigning reproach. "You know you don't have to bring anything every time you come here." James smiled. "I know you don't. But I like to see them happy." She sighed, taking the shopping from his hand. "You make it too easy for these two." James laughed. "Well, someone has to make up for their strict mother." Camilla shook her head, but deep down the warmth in her chest was undeniable. Over the last few years, James had been by their side at every important moment. When Samuel fell ill and had to go to hospital, it was James who drove there in the early hours of the morning. When Lucas had his first school performance, it was James who sat in the front row next to him. And somehow, without Camilla realizing it, he became part of the family. But there was something inside her that still hesitated. She had been abandoned once, and now, with her children involved, she couldn't make the same mistake. James seemed to notice this barrier, but he never pushed. He was just there, patient, constant. That night, after the children had gone to sleep, Camilla and James sat on the balcony watching the stars. "I know you're still afraid," he said, breaking the silence. Camilla lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "It's not fear. It's just, I don't know if I'm ready." James took her hand gently. "I'm in no hurry, Camilla. I just want you to know that I'm here." She squeezed his hand lightly. Perhaps for the first time in years it was safe to believe that. Kevin got out of the car and looked around. The place was busy, full of voices, laughter, and hurried footsteps. He wasn't sure why he had decided to stroll through the park that afternoon. He needed a moment away from his commitments, from business, from the constant pressure that weighed on his shoulders, but nothing could have prepared him for what he saw next. A few meters away, a woman was sitting on a bench, watching 2 children play in the grass. Kevin felt his heart stop for an instant. "Camilla!" The shock ran through his body like a bolt of lightning. It had been 7 years since he had last seen her, 7 years since the night he had let her go in the rain. He had always imagined that she had moved on, but he had never expected to find her there so close, and then his attention turned to the boys. 2 boys, identical to each other, were running around the grass laughing, their faces lit up with innocent amusement. Kevin remained motionless. Something inside him told him that this was no coincidence. He observed the boys' features, their slightly messy brown hair, their expressive eyes, the determined way one of them tried to climb a small toy. It was as if he was looking at a younger version of himself, A knot formed in his throat. It can't be, he muttered to himself. Camilla stood up and called the boys. "Lucas! Samuel! It's time to go home!" The name seemed to echo in Kevin's mind. It was at that moment that Camilla noticed him. Her eyes met his, and everything around her seemed to disappear. For a moment, she was paralyzed. Then she took her son's hands and led them away. Kevin couldn't move. His mind was screaming questions that he didn't know how to answer. The boys were his, and Camilla had never told him. Camilla hurried along, holding Lucas and Samuel's hands tightly. Her heart was pounding, and her mind was spinning in 1,000 directions. Kevin had seen her. And worse, he had seen the boys. She had to get out of there. "Mom, why are we running?" Samuel asked, trying to keep up. "It's all right, darling," she said, forcing a smile. "We just need to get home." But before she could get any further, a voice echoed behind her. "Camilla!" She closed her eyes for a second, trying to find the strength to face him. Then she slowly turned around. Kevin was standing a few meters away, his eyes fixed on her. But it wasn't just her he was looking at. His gaze went from Lucas to Samuel, then back to her, full of questions. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice tense. "There's nothing to talk about," she replied, lifting her chin. Kevin ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Camilla, I saw the boys." She swallowed. "So what?" "They're mine, aren't they?" His voice trembled between indignation and disbelief. Camilla remained silent. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" She laughed humorlessly. Why? So that your mother would treat them like game pieces, like she did me, so that you could decide if they were worthy of your family?" Kevin shuddered. "You took away my chance to be their father." Camilla clenched her fists. "You left me. You threw me away as if I meant nothing. I was pregnant and you didn't even care." Kevin opened his mouth to reply, but was interrupted by a new voice. "Is everything all right in here?" James approached, placing himself next to Camilla. Kevin looked at him, then at the protective way he held Camilla's shoulder. "And you are?" "James," he replied calmly. "The man who's been here for Camilla and the boys." Kevin felt a chill run down his spine. You raised them?" James nodded. Camilla took a deep breath and looked directly at Kevin. "You made your choice 7 years ago. Now you have to accept the consequences." Olivia was leafing through some documents when her phone rang. She answered indifferently, but when she heard the words on the other end of the line, her expression changed dramatically. "What's up?" Her voice lost its cold composure for a moment. The news was shocking. Kevin had 2 children, twins. She hung up the phone and remained silent for a few seconds. Then he stood up and straightened his clothes, regaining his implacable posture. That changed everything. Without wasting any time, he made a few calls and obtained Camilla's address. It wouldn't be long before this situation was resolved. The next morning, Camilla was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard a firm knock on the door. As she opened it, she felt a chill. Olivia was standing in front of her, impeccable as ever, with a sharp look on her face. "We need to talk," Camilla crossed her arms. "We have nothing to talk about." Olivia forced a cold smile. "I'm sure you'll want to hear me out. If it's about Lucas and Samuel, forget it." "They have nothing to do with you." Olivia arched an eyebrow. "They're Warburton," Camilla frowned. "No, they're my children." Olivia ignored her answer and continued. "I'm prepared to offer everything to ensure that they have a decent life. Education, security, stability." Camilla laughed in disbelief. "Do you really think you can just turn up after 7 years and decide what's best for them?" Olivia narrowed her eyes. "You can't keep them away from their father's family forever." Just then James appeared behind Camilla. "And she doesn't have to do it alone," he said firmly. Olivia glared at him. "And who are you exactly?" James didn't hesitate. "The man who has been the father that Kevin never was." Olivia took a deep breath, pulling herself together. It's not over. Camilla held her gaze. It's over for me. Without another word, Olivia turned and left, but Camilla knew it was far from over. Camilla stared out of the window, her heart racing. Ever since Olivia's visit, she had felt a constant weight on her shoulders. She knew the woman wouldn't give up so easily. And she was right. In the late afternoon, Kevin appeared on her doorstep. Unlike last time, the look on his face wasn't just one of surprise. There was a firmness in his expression that made her alert. "We need to talk," he said, his voice controlled. Camilla hesitated, but then left, closing the door behind her. "Your mother was here," she said bluntly. Kevin ran a hand over his face in frustration. "I know, and I didn't come to defend what she did." Camilla crossed her arms. "Then why are you here?" Kevin took a deep breath. "Because I want to make something clear. No matter what my mother thinks, Lucas and Samuel are my children. I made a mistake. I abandoned them without knowing it. But now I know the truth, and I won't leave them behind." Camilla felt a lump in her throat. "Do you think you can just decide that now, after 7 years? Kevin stared at her. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm just saying that I won't turn my back on them." Before Camilla could reply, a firm voice sounded behind her. "And what exactly does that mean?" James approached, crossing his arms. Kevin looked at him, recognizing their arrival he had never expected to have. "It means that I want to be in their lives," he replied. James nodded slowly. "Then prove it. Not with words. With actions." Camilla felt the weight of those words. Kevin seemed sincere, but she knew that trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. "I'm not going to let my mother hurt you," said Kevin, his voice lower. Camilla looked him in the eye, trying to find a certainty in them that she could believe. "Let's see if it's true." Kevin nodded. This time, he wasn't going to leave without a fight. The next few days were full of tension. Camilla still didn't know if she could trust Kevin, but to her surprise, he kept his word. There were no threats, demands, or impositions, just quiet attempts to get closer to his children. Lucas and Samuel, however, didn't know who he was. To them, Kevin was just an unknown man who popped in sometimes, trying to strike up a conversation, and Camilla wasn't sure how or when to tell him the truth. It was on a quiet afternoon in the park that the decision came. Samuel fell while running, scraping his knee. Before Camilla could reach him, Kevin was already at his side, helping him to his feet. "Are you all right, champ?" he asked, his voice full of concern. Samuel sniffled and nodded, accepting the help. Kevin smiled, relieved. It was at that moment that Camilla realized something. Kevin wasn't there out of obligation. He genuinely wanted to meet his children. That night, after the boys had gone to sleep, she sat down at the table with James. "I think it's time to tell you the truth," she said thoughtfully. James held her hand. "You know that, whatever the decision, I'm here for you." Camilla smiled, squeezing his hand. The next morning she called Lucas and Samuel to sit on the sofa. "I want to tell you something very important," she began, taking a deep breath. "Do you remember the man we met in the park?" The boys nodded. "He is your father." Silence filled the room. Lucas and Samuel exchanged confused glances before Samuel asked, "But he wasn't here before. Why?" Camilla felt a tightness in her chest. "It's complicated, my love. But what matters is that he wants to be here now." The boys remained pensive. Finally, Lucas said, "Can we call him Dad?" Camilla smiled, although her eyes were watery. "If you want." When Kevin showed up later, the boys ran over to him. "Hi, Dad," they said together. Kevin was paralyzed. Then he knelt down and hugged them, holding back his tears. Camilla watched the scene with mixed emotions. She knew that Kevin could never change the past, but perhaps he could do differently in the future. And that, in the end, was all that mattered.